Switzerland hid something for over a century. Not a war, not a famine, not a foreign invasion. Something that happened inside their own borders, inside their own villages, inside their own homes. And the people who did it were not monsters hiding in shadows. They were farmers, parish officials, church elders, neighbors, ordinary people, respected people, people who looked their community in the eye every Sunday morning. This is the story of the Verdingkinder. And once you hear what Switzerland did to its own children, you will never look at this country the same way again. For most of the world, Switzerland means one thing: wealth, order, neutrality, precision. The country that stayed out of every war. The country that built the most stable banks on earth. The country that gave the world the Red Cross and declared itself the guardian of human rights. That is the Switzerland the world was shown. But there was another Switzerland. One that ran quietly, efficiently, and with full government approval for over 100 years. A system that took children, poor children, illegitimate children, children of widows, children of the sick, children of anyone the parish decided was an unfit parent or an inconvenient burden on public funds. They took those children and they sold them. Not in secret, not in back rooms, in open village squares, in broad daylight, in front of the whole community. They called it the Verdingkinder system. Verding, from the German word for contract. These were contract children, human labor, assigned by local authorities to farmers who bid for the cheapest price. And the cheaper the bid, the worse the child's fate. Here is what nobody talks about. This was not medieval. This was not ancient history buried in the 1300s. This system ran from the 1800s all the way to 1981. 1981, the year MTV launched. The year IBM released the personal computer. The year the world was watching space shuttles launch into orbit. That same year, in Switzerland, children were still being contracted out to farms. Tens of thousands of them. Some estimates say over 100,000 children passed through this system. Children as young as 4 years old, taken from their mothers, assigned to strangers, put to work. Picture what that journey looked like. A parish official arrives at your door. He has papers. He has authority. He has the full weight of the local government behind him. Your mother cannot feed you, or your father is dead, or the parish has simply decided your family costs too much to support. The official points at you. You are handed a small cloth bundle. Someone ties your bootlaces one last time, and then you are placed in a cart. You look back. Your mother is standing in the road. The cart moves. The distance between you grows. And that is the last normal moment of your childhood. The farms you arrived at were not homes. You were not a child in those houses. You were a resource. You woke before the family. You worked after the family slept. You carried buckets that were too heavy for your body. You pulled stones from fields with hands that had not yet finished growing. You scrubbed floors on your knees while the farm family sat at their table and ate. You did not sit at that table. You stood at the wall with a tin plate. You slept in whatever room was left over, a storage room, a corner of the barn, a straw mat on a stone floor. And if you were slow or clumsy or too tired to work at the pace demanded of you, there were consequences. Survivors have described them. But the full truth of what happened inside those farmhouses, behind those closed doors, to children with no parents and no advocates and no one watching, took decades to come out. Because nobody was watching. That was the point. The parish placed you. The farmer paid for you. The contract was signed. And then the system turned away. No inspections. No follow-up. No mechanism for a child to report what was happening to anyone with the power or the will to act. You had no legal standing. You had no family nearby. You were in a strange house, in a strange village, surrounded by people who had paid for your labor and owed you nothing more than basic survival. And sometimes not even that. Children ran away. They were brought back. Children wrote letters. The letters did not always reach anyone who helped. Children grew up, and they carried what happened to them in silence for decades, because Switzerland did not want to hear it. Because this is the part that cuts deepest. The cover-up was not dramatic. It was not a government conspiracy with classified files and shredded documents. It was simpler than that, and in some ways more brutal. It was silence agreed upon by an entire society. Farmers knew. Parish officials knew. Neighbors knew. The children who sat in church pews in clean clothes while the Verdingkind sat alone in the last row, their parents knew. Everyone knew. And for generations, the collective decision of Swiss society was to say nothing, to call it normal, to call it practical, To call it charity, because after all, the child was being housed and fed. To look at a child standing at the wall with a tin plate while your family ate at the table and convince yourself that this was acceptable, that this was generous, that you were doing them a favor. The survivors started speaking in the 1990s, quietly at first, then louder. Old men and women in their 60s, 70s, 80s, finally putting words to what had been done to them as children. What they described was not isolated. It was not a few bad farms and unlucky placements. It was systematic. It was widespread. It was the normal experience of tens of thousands of children across Switzerland across more than a century. In 2013, the Swiss government formally acknowledged the system. In 2017, official apologies were issued. Reparations followed, though survivors and advocates argued the amounts were insufficient for what had been taken from them. And in 2020, the last living survivors gathered, elderly men and women, some using canes, some helped up steps. They stood in front of the country that had taken their childhoods. And Switzerland finally said the words it had refused to say for 100 years. But here is what stays with you long after this video ends. Every single one of those survivors was once a small child standing in a village square, holding a bundle, being looked at by strangers calculating how much their labor was worth. They had names. They had mothers who watched carts disappear down empty roads and never stopped watching. They had hands that cracked and bled from work before they were old enough to understand why it was happening to them. And for decades, the country that built its entire global identity on order, neutrality, and moral authority looked at those children and decided they were more valuable as labor than as human beings. Switzerland hid this. For 100 years, they hid it. The only reason you know about it today is because those survivors refused to stay silent. They decided that what was done to them in those farmhouses, in those village squares, on those long cart rides away from their mothers, deserved to be known by the world. The question is what you do with that now. Share this video, because silence is exactly how this lasted 100 years. Drop a single word in the comments describing what you felt watching this story, because those children deserved witnesses then, and the survivors who finally made the world listen deserve them now.